Right before the music break, something happened on that court that set the tone for everything that followed. Caitlin Clark looked over at Tiffany Hayes and said, clear as day, "Hey, you and me, Hayes, you and me." That was the moment. That was the jump. That was the kind of energy that lets you know exactly what kind of player you are dealing with and exactly what kind of night the Golden State Valkyries were about to have. The roof was coming down. The game was all tied up with 5 minutes and 14 seconds left on the clock, and Caitlin Clark was standing there in the middle of it all, completely unbothered, issuing a personal invitation. We all know how the rest of that story went, but here is the part that keeps me fired up. The game ended. The final buzzer sounded. The scoreboard told the whole truth in big, bold numbers that nobody in that building or watching at home could misread or misinterpret. Indiana Fever, 90. Golden State Valkyries, 82. And then, almost immediately, the Golden State head coach and one of their most experienced players walked up to microphones and started trying to rewrite what had just happened in front of thousands of witnesses and millions of viewers. That is what we are here to talk about today. Welcome to Simply Explained. And today we are going deep. We are going deep on the Golden State Valkyries post-game reaction. The comments from Tiffany Hayes that sent the internet into an immediate frenzy. The glaring before and after contradictions in Natalie Nakase's pregame and post-game pressers. And the staggering, historic, never-before-seen individual performance that Caitlin Clark delivered that makes all of the post-game spin feel not just hollow, but genuinely disrespectful to what we all watched unfold in real time. Let's get into every single layer of this. Before we talk about anything anyone said after the final buzzer, we need to establish exactly what happened during the 40 minutes of basketball that came before it. Because the facts of what occurred on that court are what make the post-game narrative so transparently and almost comically inadequate. Caitlin Clark, in Friday's game against the Golden State Valkyries, went for 22 points and 9 assists in 32 minutes of playing time. The Indiana Fever came back in the second half and won the game 90-82. Clark was hitting from deep. She was running the offense with precision. She was finding open teammates in traffic, and she was making the kinds of split-second decisions that separate elite playmakers from everyone else on the floor. She was doing everything a franchise player is supposed to do when the game is on the line, and she was doing all of it while the other team was specifically and deliberately trying to make her uncomfortable. But here is where the story goes from great individual performance to something that belongs in a completely different category of conversation entirely. According to multiple sports outlets that cover the WNBA, Caitlin Clark became the first player in the entire history of the Women's National Basketball Association to record 20 or more points and 5 or more assists in each of the first 5 games of a season. Every single game, not 4 out of 5. Not a hot 3-game stretch with a couple of hiccups mixed in. Every single game. From tip-off of Game 1 all the way through Game 5 against the Valkyries, Caitlin Clark delivered 20-plus points and 5-plus assists without a single exception. That has never happened before in this league. Not in the early years of the WNBA, when the foundations of this game were being laid by legends who deserve every ounce of recognition they have received and more. Not in the peak years of the all-time greats who turned this league into something worth building a franchise around. Not in recent seasons when the talent level and athleticism across the league has never been higher. Never, in any era, by any player in any context, has someone done what Caitlin Clark has done in the opening 5 games of a season. The Golden State Valkyries did not just lose a basketball game on Friday night. They became Game 5 of a historically unprecedented individual performance that nobody who loves this sport and loves this league should be downplaying, minimizing, or pretending was somehow beside the point. That is the context in which everything that was said after that final buzzer needs to be understood. Let us start with the head coach, because the head coach sets the tone for how the whole organization talks about what happened and what it meant. Before the game, Natalie Nakase sat in front of microphones and demonstrated genuine, detailed, comprehensive preparation. She talked about the challenge of guarding Clark at the perimeter because her shooting range begins at distances that most defenders simply cannot respect without completely disorganizing their own defensive structure. She acknowledged that Clark is comfortable going to her left. She talked about the need to pick her up higher than you would most players because of how early she is willing to release the ball. She discussed the concept of putting physical pressure on her while recognizing that Indiana as a team plays at a pace that makes containment a collective responsibility rather than something one defender can manage alone. That is a thorough breakdown. That is a coaching staff that has watched film, identified tendencies, and arrived at the arena with a specific plan and genuine awareness of what they were up against. Credit where credit is genuinely due. Natalie Nakase did her homework before that game, and then the game happened, and Clark went for 22-9, and the Fever won by 8. And then Natalie Nakase stood in front of those same microphones in the postgame, and the entire detailed scouting report was reduced to essentially 2 ideas. 1, we were being physical. 2, Caitlin Clark does not like physicality. That is the analysis. After everything that was laid out in the pregame, after all the specifics about shooting range and defensive positioning and team pace and collective pressure, after a loss by 8 points. After watching Clark hit logo threes and distribute the ball to the tune of 9 assists. The post-game message was we were physical and she does not like it. I need to ask the question that this framing immediately raises. Disruptive of what exactly? Disruptive of the 22 points she scored? Disruptive of the 9 assists she distributed? Disruptive of the 3-point shots that fell through the net with a kind of clean accuracy that makes defensive rotations look pointless? Because if that level of production represents the version of Caitlin Clark that your physicality disrupted and made uncomfortable, I genuinely and sincerely want to know what she looks like when nobody is bothering her at all. Because the undisrupted version of that performance is a number I'm not sure the human mind can fully process. Here is the thing about great coaches. They acknowledge when an opponent beat their scheme. They acknowledge when a player was simply better than what they had prepared for. They make the adjustments, they plan for the rematch, and they move forward. That acknowledgement is not weakness. It is not some kind of surrender. It is intellectual honesty, and it is the foundation of the kind of continuous improvement that separates teams that grow from teams that stagnate. The scoreboard read 90-82. The box score had Clark's 22-9 sitting right there in plain sight for every journalist, every analyst, every fan, and every camera in the building to see and record. Pretending the game plan was fundamentally sound, and the execution was close serves nobody and explains nothing, least of all the final score. Now let us address the specific claim directly, clearly, and with the full weight of the available evidence, because this particular talking point does not just frustrate me in the context of this single game. It frustrates me because it is part of a persistent pattern that has followed Caitlin Clark since she entered this league, and it needs to be called out by name every single time somebody reaches for it as an explanation. Caitlin Clark does not like physicality. That is the narrative. It has been floating around in certain conversations about her game since before she played her first professional minute. And the implication is always the same, that there is some physical threshold, some level of defensive aggression and contact that will expose a limitation in her game and neutralize what she does on the court. Here is what the evidence actually shows. Over the past year and more of her WNBA career, Caitlin Clark has been one of the most physically targeted players in the entire league. She has absorbed hard fouls. She has been shoved, including in this very game when Janelle Salon pushed her in the back in a moment that was captured clearly on film. She has faced a level of deliberate physical contact in games that, if it were happening to other marquee players in other marquee markets, would be generating significantly more league-wide attention and discussion than it currently does. And through every single one of those moments, she has continued to show up, continued to compete, continued to score, continued to distribute, and continued to win basketball games. Her team is currently on a 2-game winning streak. She is personally on a 5-game historic individual run. If a player who has absorbed that volume of physical targeting and continued to produce at these levels does not like physicality, I would love to see what a player who genuinely embraces physical play looks like by comparison. Because from where I am sitting, the evidence strongly suggests that Caitlin Clark handles physicality just fine. What she does not do, and this is the crucial distinction, is let the contact stop her from making you pay on the scoreboard. She absorbs it, she keeps moving, she finds her shot or she finds the open teammate, and the points go up anyway. That is not a player who dislikes physicality. That is a player who has figured out how to play through it at an elite level and use it against the teams that try to deploy it as a strategy. Now let us talk about Tiffany Hayes, because Hayes had things to say in the postgame as well, and I want to be fair about this while also being completely honest about how it landed and why the reaction was as strong as it was. Hayes was asked about the game, about the loss, and about Clark's performance in the context of Indiana's victory. Her response steered toward the idea that the outcome was fundamentally about the Valkyries' own errors, their own defensive breakdowns, the things they need to fix within their own system. She pointed the lens inward. The loss in her framing was essentially self-inflicted. It was about Golden State's mistakes rather than Indiana's performance. It was no one else. I understand the philosophy behind that framing. Genuinely. Elite competitors at every level of professional sports are taught to focus on what they control, to look internally after losses, to resist the temptation to credit the opponent in ways that feel like they diminish the competitive standard of the losing team. That philosophy has genuine value. Teams that constantly blame opponents for losses never fix the actual problems that live inside their own system. But there is a meaningful and important difference between taking ownership of a loss in a way that is intellectually honest and taking ownership of a loss in a way that functions as a deliberate attempt to minimize what the other team did to you. The first approach says we made mistakes and we need to fix them while acknowledging that our opponent also made great plays. The second approach says everything that happened was our fault and the opponent was essentially incidental to the outcome. And here is the problem with applying the second approach to this specific game. It is not no one else. It is very specifically, very demonstrably, very historically someone else. It is someone else who just became the only player in WNBA history to post 20-5 in every single one of her first 5 games. When Caitlin Clark is rising up from logo range and hitting shots that most players in this league would not even attempt in practice, let alone in a close game in the fourth quarter, that is not a Golden State defensive lapse. That is an elite basketball player making an elite basketball play. When she is finding the open man in traffic and threading, passes through defensive rotations that are actively trying to take the ball away from her, that is not the Valkyries losing their assignment. That is exceptional court vision and decision-making being executed under pressure by someone who is genuinely great at this game. The two things, Golden State's mistakes and Clark's excellence, can coexist simultaneously. They almost always do when a great player beats a good team. But erasing one half of that equation in the post-game framing, specifically the half that credits the player who just made WNBA history against your defense, reads as dismissive. And the internet read it exactly that way because it was. The contrast between the Valkyries post-game and the comments from Aaliyah Boston on the Fever side is genuinely instructive, because Boston actually said out loud what the Golden State players seemed reluctant to fully acknowledge. Boston described how the Valkyries were specifically hunting Clark on the defensive end. Isolation situations, top of the key, over and over, designed to put Clark in one-on-one defensive positions and make her the weak link on that end of the floor. It was a deliberate, organized strategy built around the idea that you exploit the star player's defensive limitations and use that as a pathway back into the game. And Boston also described how the Fever responded to that strategy. They forced Golden State into contested 2-point attempts. They held the Valkyries to 4 of 17 shooting in the fourth quarter. They made the adjustments in real time that you have to make when a team is executing a game plan specifically designed to counteract your best player. That is a win that was earned through basketball intelligence, coaching adjustments, and player execution under pressure. That is not a win that happened because the other team simply malfunctioned and handed Indiana a gift. The Fever saw what Golden State was doing, they adapted, and they were better in the moments that decided the game. Aaliyah Boston understood that clearly enough to describe it precisely and give appropriate credit to the process that produced the victory. It would have been refreshing to hear even a fraction of that same clarity from the Golden State side about what Indiana, and specifically Caitlin Clark, did to make that process work. I want to zoom out for a moment because what happened in this postgame is not an isolated incident. It is part of a consistent pattern that has played out over and over in conversations surrounding Caitlin Clark and the WNBA, and I think it is worth naming that pattern clearly and directly. There is a persistent, identifiable reluctance in certain corners of this league and certain media spaces to credit Caitlin Clark for her accomplishments in the straightforward, unreserved, enthusiastic way that historically unprecedented individual excellence deserves to be credited. So when she wins, the explanation tends to lean toward factors other than her individual greatness. The opponent made mistakes. The defense had a bad night. The circumstances were favorable. She was lucky to be in the right system. Something, anything, other than the simple, honest answer that she is an extraordinary basketball player who is better than most of the defenses that line up against her on any given night. I am not saying this pattern is universal. Plenty of people inside and outside this league speak about Clark with complete intellectual honesty about what she brings to the floor. But the pattern is real, and it is consistent enough to be worth calling out when specific examples of its surface in post-game pressers that are broadcast for everyone to see and evaluate. 20 points and 5 assists in every single game of the first 5 games of a season, in the entire history of this league. That belongs to one person, and it deserves to be recognized without asterisks, without qualifications, and without the kind of careful narrative management that tries to make it seem like the teams on the other side of those performances were mostly just beating themselves. The rematch is scheduled for next Thursday, and I want to tell you exactly how I see it setting up, because the dynamics are going to be fascinating. The Golden State Valkyries are going to come into that game angry. Not the kind of angry you sleep off by the morning. The specific, sustained, motivating kind of angry that professional athletes carry with them through a week of practice when they know a rematch is coming, and the whole sports internet spent 7 days discussing how they got handled. Natalie Nakase is going to have a revised game plan, sharper wrinkles, different defensive coverages, adjustments built on everything she learned from watching the film of what went wrong. The players are going to be competing with an edge that comes from having something to prove and a concrete opportunity to prove it. That is what rematches in professional sports look like. The scouting gets tighter, the execution gets sharper, and the losing team almost always comes back with something that makes the second meeting different from the first. Indiana needs to understand that going in, and they need to prepare accordingly. The Fever cannot afford a slow start in that building. They cannot let Golden State dictate the pace early and build confidence on the back of a sluggish Indiana opening. They need to set the tone from the jump, and they need Caitlin Clark to walk through that door with the exact same locked-in focus and execution that she brought to Game 5 of her historic run. But here is what keeps me confident about Indiana's chances in that rematch, even with all of that context in mind. This is a team that just won 2 straight games while navigating an absolute week of noise and distraction. League warnings, injury report situations, coaching press conference contradictions, technical fouls that players did not even know they had received. All of that swirling around them, and the Fever competed and won through all of it. That tells you something real and meaningful about the character and the competitive resilience of this group. And with Caitlin Clark performing the way she is currently performing, at a level that has no precedent in this league's history, the Fever have every reason to believe they can match whatever Golden State brings to the second meeting. The comments from Hayes and Nakase in the postgame are bulletin board material now. They are fuel. They are one more reason for Clark to walk into that gym next Thursday with something to prove. And if her first 5 games of this season have demonstrated anything at all, it is that a motivated Caitlin Clark with something to prove is a genuinely terrifying thing for whoever is assigned to guard her. Let me bring this all the way back around to where we started, because the beginning of this story is still the most important part of it. Caitlin Clark looked at Tiffany Hayes with 5 minutes and 14 seconds left in a tied game and said, "You and me." That was not posturing. That was not theater. That was a player who knows exactly who she is and exactly what she is capable of doing when the moment is biggest and the stakes are highest. And then she went out and backed every word of it up with 22 points and 9 assists in a second-half comeback victory that became Game 5 of the most historically dominant individual start to a season in WNBA history. The Valkyries did not want to say that plainly after the game. They wanted to talk about physicality that produced no result and mistakes that explained away the brilliance that beat them. But the scoreboard was sitting right there. The box score was sitting right there. The history books were being updated in real time while the post-game pressers were being conducted. 90-82, 22-9. The first player ever to do what she did in the first 5 games. Those numbers are not going anywhere. No amount of post-game narrative management changes a single digit on any of those lines. Caitlin Clark is making history in this league, and the Golden State Valkyries got a front-row seat to Game 5 of that historic run and went home with a loss to show for it. That is the story. That is the whole story. And that is the story Street Hoops is always going to tell you straight, with no filter, no fluff, and no apologies. Smash that like button if you are with us. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Valkyries were genuinely downplaying Clark, or just doing the professional sports internal accountability thing? Do you think the rematch gets closer? Do you think Nakase has a scheme that actually works the second time around? All of that goes in the comments. I want every single response. If you are not subscribed to Simply Explained, you are missing the realest sports takes on this platform every single day. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and stay locked in because we are not slowing down for anyone. Simply Explained never stops. Let's go.